Tonight, we journey through one of Alfred Hitchcock's most beloved thrillers. But we'll experience it as a gentle, calming story. This is North by Northwest, not as a tale of suspense and danger, but as a peaceful exploration of one man's unexpected adventure across America. Let your mind drift as we follow Roger Thornhill through bustling cities, quiet train rides, and vast open landscapes. But before that, my name's Murphy, and I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time of day it is for you. If this brings you calm, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more peaceful nights ahead. Our story begins on a warm afternoon in Manhattan, where the summer sun filters through the glass windows of the Plaza Hotel's Oak Bar. The atmosphere is quiet and refined, with the soft clink of ice in glasses and the gentle murmur of business conversations floating through the air. Roger Thornhill sits at a table with two business associates, discussing an advertising campaign over lunch. Roger is a successful advertising executive, the kind of man who moves through New York with easy confidence. He's well dressed in a perfectly tailored grey suit, his dark hair neatly combed, and his manner relaxed yet attentive. At 40-something, Roger has built a comfortable life for himself in the world of Madison Avenue advertising. The conversation flows smoothly as Roger explains his latest campaign ideas. His voice is calm and persuasive, the voice of someone who has spent years learning how to present ideas in ways that make people listen. The other men nod appreciatively as Roger outlines his strategies, and there's something peaceful about watching these businessmen in their element, conducting their affairs in the comfortable surroundings of one of New York's finest hotels. Roger excuses himself from the table to send a telegram to his mother. He walks across the elegant lobby of the plaza, his footsteps muffled by thick carpets. The hotel lobby is a sanctuary of marble and gold, with fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases and the soft sound of a piano drifting from somewhere nearby. Everything about this world speaks of order, comfort, and predictability. As Roger approaches the front desk to arrange his telegram, something unexpected happens. A bellhop walks through the lobby, calling out a name, paging Mr. George Kaplan. "Mr. George Kaplan, please." The call echoes softly through the refined space, just another routine hotel announcement. At that exact moment, Roger raises his hand to signal the bellhop about his telegram. It's an innocent gesture, the kind of small movement people make dozens of times each day without thinking. But this simple action sets everything in motion. Two men in dark suits, who have been sitting quietly in the lobby reading newspapers, notice Roger's raised hand. They assume he is responding to the page for George Kaplan. These men have been waiting patiently for Mr. Kaplan to reveal himself, and now they believe they have found him. The men approach Roger with polite smiles. They're well-dressed, professional-looking individuals who could easily be mistaken for businessmen themselves. Their manner is courteous but insistent, as they inform Roger that someone would like to speak with him. Roger, assuming this has something to do with his advertising business, agrees to accompany them. There's something almost dreamlike about this moment of misunderstanding. In the elegant surroundings of the Plaza Hotel, surrounded by the gentle sounds of civilized life, Roger has no way of knowing that his identity has just been confused with someone else entirely. The mistake happens so naturally, so quietly, that it feels like the most ordinary thing in the world. The two men guide Roger outside the Plaza Hotel, where a black Cadillac waits at the curb. The afternoon sun glints off the car's polished surface, and the city street bustles with its usual activity. taxis honking gently, people strolling along Fifth Avenue, the distant sound of construction work, mixing with urban life. One of the men opens the car door for Roger, with the politeness of a professional chauffeur. Roger, still assuming this is some kind of business meeting, slides into the comfortable leather seat. The interior of the Cadillac is spacious and luxurious, with the quiet hum of a well-maintained engine and the soft whisper of air conditioning. As the car pulls away from the curb and merges into the flow of Manhattan traffic, Roger settles back into his seat. He makes casual conversation with his companions, trying to understand who wants to meet with him and why. The men are polite but vague in their responses, deflecting his questions with pleasant but non-committal answers. The Cadillac glides through the streets of New York, passing familiar landmarks that Roger knows well. They travel through Central Park, where families are enjoying lazy afternoon picnics under shady trees, and joggers move along the winding paths. The scene outside the car windows is peaceful and normal, giving no hint that anything unusual is happening. After a while, Roger realizes they've been driving for quite some time, heading out of Manhattan and into the countryside of Long Island. The city gradually gives way to suburbs, then to rolling hills and estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. The landscape becomes more rural and quiet, with tall trees creating canopies over winding roads. The Cadillac eventually turns through an impressive set of gates and follows a long, curved driveway lined with mature oak trees. At the end of the drive sits an elegant mansion, the kind of estate that speaks of old money and established wealth. The house is built in a classic colonial style, with white columns supporting a grand portico and ivy climbing gracefully up the brick walls. Roger steps out of the car onto a circular gravel drive, taking in the peaceful surroundings. The estate is beautifully maintained, with manicured lawns stretching toward distant tree lines and the soft sound of wind chimes drifting from a nearby garden. It's the sort of place where wealthy families have lived for generations, conducting their business far from the noise and chaos of the city. The men escort Roger through the front entrance and into a spacious foyer decorated with antiques and oil paintings. The interior of the mansion is as impressive as its exterior, with high ceilings, polished hardwood floors, and the kind of furniture that has been carefully collected over decades. Everything about the house suggests refinement and taste. They lead Roger into a comfortable study lined with books from floor to ceiling. Leather-bound volumes fill the shelves, and soft reading lamps cast a warm glow over Persian rugs and wing-back chairs. A fire crackles quietly in the fireplace, even though it's summer, adding to the room's atmosphere of quiet luxury. Roger is invited to take a seat in one of the leather chairs, and he settles in to wait for whoever has requested this meeting. The room is peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of a grandfather clock ticking in the corner, and the occasional pop from the fireplace. Through tall windows, Roger can see the estate's gardens, where carefully tended flower beds create splashes of color against the green lawn. After a few minutes of waiting in the comfortable study, Roger hears footsteps approaching along the polished hallway. The door opens, and a distinguished gentleman enters the room with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being in charge. This is Philip Van Damme, though Roger doesn't know his name yet. Van Damme is an elegant man in his 60s, with silver hair and the kind of refined bearing that comes from a lifetime of privilege. He moves with deliberate grace, his expensive suit perfectly tailored, his manner polite, but somehow distant. There's something almost theatrical about Van Damme. as if he's always aware of the impression he's making. Van Damme greets Roger with a warm smile, apologizing for the unconventional way they've brought him here. His voice is cultured and smooth, with just a hint of an accent that's difficult to place. He explains that they needed to speak with Roger about a matter of mutual interest, though he remains vague about the specifics. Roger tries to explain that there seems to be some mistake, that he doesn't understand why he's been brought to this estate or what business they might have together. But Van Damme listens to these protests with the patient smile of someone who doesn't quite believe what he's hearing. The conversation continues in this polite but puzzling way, with Van Damme referring to Roger as Mr. Kaplan, and Roger insisting that his name is Thornhill. The misunderstanding deepens with each exchange, but both men maintain their civilized demeanor, as if they're discussing nothing more controversial than the weather. As the conversation continues, Van Damme's assistant, a thin, quiet man named Leonard, brings in a silver tray with crystal decanters and glasses. Van Damme pours generous measures of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light from the fireplace as it flows into the glasses. Van Damme insists that Roger join him for a drink, presenting it as a matter of courtesy between gentlemen. When Roger politely declines, explaining that he rarely drinks during the day, Van Damme's manner becomes more insistent. The two men who brought Roger to the mansion position themselves nearby, their presence suddenly feeling less like hospitality and more like supervision. Roger realizes that his situation has changed. What began as a confusing business meeting has become something else entirely. The atmosphere in the study shifts subtly, though Van Damme maintains his polite demeanor throughout. He continues to address Roger as Mr. Kaplan, refusing to accept any other identity. The men encourage Roger to drink the bourbon, and when he continues to resist, they make it clear that this is not actually a request. Roger finds himself in the strange position of being forced to consume alcohol in the elegant surroundings of a gentleman's study, with classical music playing softly from a radio in the corner, and the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows. As Roger drinks, the bourbon burns his throat and makes his head feel light. Van Damme watches with the patient attention of someone waiting for a specific result. The room begins to feel warm and slightly unsteady, and Roger realizes that something has been added to the alcohol. When Roger becomes too intoxicated to resist effectively, Van Damme's men help him to his feet and escort him outside to the same Cadillac that brought him to the estate. The summer evening air feels cool against his face as they walk across the gravel drive, but his legs are unsteady and his vision slightly blurred. They place Roger behind the wheel of the car, positioning him as if he's the driver. One of Van Damme's men adjusts the mirrors and seat, then starts the engine. Roger tries to protest, but his words come out slurred and confused. The men step back from the car, and Roger realizes with growing alarm that they intend for him to drive while intoxicated. The Cadillac begins to move down the estate's winding driveway, but Roger's impaired coordination makes it difficult to control the vehicle. The car weaves back and forth across the narrow road, tires crunching on gravel and occasionally bumping against the low stone walls that line the drive. Roger struggles to maintain control as the car picks up speed on the downhill slope. The evening light filters through the overhanging trees, creating shifting patterns of shadow and brightness across the windshield. His reflexes are slow and uncertain, making even simple actions like steering and braking feel impossibly complicated. The car veers off the driveway and crashes through some bushes before Roger manages to regain partial control. Branches scrape against the windows and doors as he fights to get back onto the road. The engine continues to run, and somehow Roger manages to guide the vehicle towards the estate's main gate. As he reaches the public road, Roger encounters another car traveling in the opposite direction. The other driver, seeing the erratic movement of Roger's vehicle, swerves to avoid a collision. Both cars end up stopped on the shoulder of the road, engines running, but neither seriously damaged. The other driver gets out to check on Roger, and it quickly becomes apparent that Roger has been drinking. His speech is slurred, his movements uncoordinated, and the smell of bourbon is strong on his breath. The other driver, concerned about Roger's condition and the dangerous way he was driving, decides to call the police. Within a short time, police cars arrive on the scene, with their red lights flashing softly against the darkening sky. The officers approach Roger with professional courtesy, but it's clear that they're treating this as a case of drunk driving. They ask Roger to step out of the vehicle and perform some basic coordination tests, which he fails due to his involuntary intoxication. Roger tries to explain what really happened, describing his kidnapping from the Plaza Hotel and the forced drinking at Van Damme's estate. But his story sounds fantastical, and his intoxicated condition makes him an unreliable witness to his own experience. The officers listen politely, but clearly don't believe his account of events. Roger finds himself spending the night at the local police station, a modest building in the Long Island suburbs, where the pace of life is much slower than Manhattan. The holding area is clean and quiet, with the occasional sound of radio chatter from the dispatch desk, and officers moving through the corridors with coffee cups and paperwork. The next morning, Roger's mother arrives to collect him. Clara Thornhill is an elegant woman in her 70s, impeccably dressed and carrying herself with the dignity of someone from a well-established New York family. She's clearly concerned about Roger's situation, but there's also a hint of exasperation in her manner, as if this isn't the first time her son has found himself in an unusual predicament. Mrs. Thornhill speaks with the desk sergeant, arranging for Roger's release and handling the necessary paperwork. Her interactions with the police are polite but firm, displaying the confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with bureaucratic situations. She asks practical questions about court dates and legal requirements, while Roger sits nearby, still feeling somewhat unsteady from his experience the night before. As they leave the police station together, Mrs. Thornhill listens to Roger's account of what happened. She's clearly skeptical of some aspects of his story, particularly the parts about being kidnapped by a mysterious businessman and forced to drink bourbon at a Long Island mansion. The whole thing sounds like the plot of a novel, rather than something that would happen to a respectable advertising executive. Roger insists that every detail of his story is true, but he can understand his mother's doubts. Even to him, the events of the previous day seem surreal and hard to believe. They walk to Mrs. Thornhill's car, a comfortable sedan parked in the shade of an old maple tree, and begin the drive back toward Manhattan. Despite his mother's skepticism, Roger remains determined to prove that his story is true. He convinces the police to accompany him back to the Long Island estate where he was taken, bringing along 2 detectives who agree to investigate his claims. When they arrive at the estate, Roger is surprised to find that the atmosphere has changed completely. The same impressive mansion sits behind its iron gates, but now there are cars parked in the circular drive, and people moving in and out of the house. The scene looks like preparation for some kind of social event, rather than the quiet, somewhat sinister setting Roger remembers. The detectives speak with the people at the house, who identify themselves as staff members preparing for a party. They explain that the mansion belongs to Lester Townsend, a well-respected member of the local community, who is currently at the United Nations in New York City on diplomatic business. When Roger describes Philip Van Damme and asks about the events of the previous evening, the staff members seem genuinely confused. They insist that no one matching Van Damme's description has been at the estate, and they have no knowledge of any meeting with an advertising executive named Roger Thornhill or George Kaplan. The staff members are cooperative and polite, inviting the detectives to search the house if necessary. They show them through the same study where Roger met with Van Damme, but now it looks like any other room in a well-appointed home. There's no evidence of the meeting Roger described, no bourbon glasses, no signs that anything unusual took place. Frustrated by the lack of evidence at the Long Island mansion, Roger decides to travel into Manhattan to find Lester Townsend at the United Nations building. If he can speak with Townsend directly, perhaps he can get some answers about who was using the man's house and why they mistook Roger for George Kaplan. The United Nations building rises majestically above the East River, its glass and steel facade reflecting the afternoon sunlight. The plaza in front of the building bustles with quiet activity as diplomats and staff members move between meetings, their conversations conducted in dozens of different languages. There's something peaceful about this international gathering place, where representatives from around the world come together to discuss global affairs. Roger enters the building through the main lobby, where the atmosphere is formal but welcoming. Security guards check his identification and direct him toward the appropriate elevators. The interior of the UN building is impressive in its simplicity, with clean lines and modern design, creating an environment that feels both important and accessible. He finds his way to the lounge area, where diplomats and visitors often gather between meetings. The space is furnished with comfortable seating, arranged in small conversational groups, and large windows provide views of the river and the Manhattan skyline beyond. The conversations around him are conducted in hushed tones, creating an atmosphere of international diplomacy and cooperation. Roger approaches a man who matches the description he was given of Lester Townsend. This man is older than Van Damme, with a different bearing entirely. He's clearly an experienced diplomat, someone who has spent years navigating the complex world of international relations. When Roger introduces himself and begins to explain his situation, Townsend listens with the patient attention of someone accustomed to unusual stories. Townsend confirms that he does indeed own the Long Island estate, but he insists that he wasn't there the previous evening. He has been in New York City for several days, attending meetings and staying at his Manhattan apartment. He seems genuinely puzzled by Roger's description of Philip Van Damme and the events at the mansion. As Roger was about to leave the building, he was interrupted by a commotion nearby. Other people in the lounge begin to gather around someone who appears to have collapsed in one of the seating areas. Roger looks over and is shocked to see that the person who has collapsed is actually Lester Townsend himself, the real Townsend, the man he has been speaking with. Townsend suddenly staggers backward, his face showing pain and confusion, and then falls to the floor. The peaceful atmosphere of the UN lounge is instantly transformed as people rush to help. Someone calls for medical assistance, while others try to determine what has happened. Roger kneels beside Townsend, trying to understand what has caused the man's sudden collapse. It becomes apparent that Townsend has been attacked, though the method isn't immediately obvious. There's no visible wound, no sign of violence, but Townsend is clearly in distress and losing consciousness. The other people in the lounge look around anxiously, trying to identify what has happened and who might be responsible. As Roger tries to help Townsend, he notices something small on the floor nearby. What appears to be a small knife or blade, barely larger than a pen. He reaches down to pick it up, trying to understand how it relates to Townsend's condition. At that moment, photographers who happen to be in the building covering other UN activities notice the commotion and begin taking pictures. The flash of cameras begins to pop around the lounge as news personnel realize that something significant is happening. Roger finds himself holding what appears to be the weapon that was used to attack Townsend, just as photographers capture the scene. From their perspective, it looks as though Roger has just attacked the diplomat. The timing is perfect from a photographic standpoint, but disastrous for Roger's situation. The scene at the United Nations quickly becomes chaotic as security personnel arrive and begin trying to understand what has happened. Roger attempts to explain that he was trying to help Townsend, not harm him, but his explanation sounds confused and desperate under the circumstances. The photographs taken by the news photographers clearly show Roger holding what appears to be a weapon while standing over the injured diplomat. From any observer's perspective, the evidence seems to point toward Roger as the person responsible for the attack. Roger realizes that his situation has become much more serious than a simple case of mistaken identity. Now, he's potentially facing charges related to an assault on a United Nations diplomat, which carries far more severe consequences than anything he had imagined when this adventure began. Security personnel escort Roger towards the building's exit, but he manages to break away from them in the confusion of the crowded lobby. He pushes through groups of diplomats and visitors, making his way toward the main entrance, while security guards call after him. Roger emerges from the UN building onto the plaza, where the afternoon sun feels harsh after the controlled lighting inside. He can hear security personnel behind him, but he has a head start as he moves through the crowds of tourists and international visitors who gather around the building throughout the day. He hurries towards the street, looking for a taxi or some other means of escape. The normal rhythm of New York City continues around him. Traffic moving along the avenues, pedestrians going about their business, the distant sound of construction work, and car horns creating the usual urban symphony. Roger manages to flag down a taxi and climbs into the back seat, giving the driver an address in Manhattan while trying to catch his breath. As the taxi pulls away from the curb, he looks back at the UN building and realizes that his quiet life as an advertising executive has been completely turned upside down. Roger realizes that staying in New York has become impossible. The newspapers will soon carry the photographs of him at the United Nations, and the police will be looking for him in connection with the attack on Lester Townsend. His only hope is to find the real George Kaplan and somehow prove his innocence. He remembers that his kidnappers mentioned Chicago in their conversations, and he decides that George Kaplan might be found there. The famous 20th Century Limited train departs from Grand Central Terminal every evening, carrying passengers in comfort across the American countryside to Chicago. Grand Central Terminal in the early evening is a magnificent sight, with its soaring ceiling decorated with constellations and the warm glow of enormous windows filtering the last sunlight of the day. The terminal bustles with travelers, but there's an orderly quality to the activity as passengers make their way to different platforms. Roger purchases a ticket under a false name, using cash to avoid leaving a paper trail that the police might follow. The ticket agent barely glances at him as she processes the transaction, and Roger feels a small sense of relief at how easily he can blend into the crowd of ordinary travelers. The 20th Century Limited sits at its platform like a sleek silver snake, its streamlined cars reflecting the lights of the terminal. This is one of America's most famous trains, known for carrying wealthy passengers and celebrities between New York and Chicago in luxurious comfort. The exterior of the train gleams with polished metal, and uniformed porters stand ready to assist passengers with their luggage. Roger boards the train with only a small overnight bag, trying to look like any other businessman making a routine trip to Chicago. The interior of the train is as impressive as its reputation suggests, with Art Deco design elements and rich materials creating an atmosphere of elegant travel. As Roger makes his way through the train looking for his compartment, he passes through the dining car, where white tablecloths and crystal glasses create an atmosphere of refined dining. The car is beautifully appointed, with comfortable seating arranged to take advantage of the large windows that will offer views of the countryside during the journey. It's here that Roger first notices Eve Kendall, though he doesn't know her name yet. She's an attractive woman in her 30s, elegantly dressed and carrying herself with the poise of someone accustomed to fine things. She sits alone at a table near the window, reading a book while sipping wine, seemingly unbothered by traveling without a companion. There's something magnetic about Eve that draws Roger's attention. She has the kind of beauty that doesn't depend on youth alone, but comes from intelligence and confidence. Her clothes are perfectly chosen, her hair styled in a way that looks effortless, but clearly required professional attention, and her manner suggests someone who is comfortable in sophisticated settings. Roger finds his own seat in the dining car and orders dinner, trying to appear casual while stealing glances at the mysterious woman across the aisle. The train begins to move, pulling slowly out of Grand Central Terminal and into the tunnel that will carry it under the streets of Manhattan before emerging into the open countryside. As the train picks up speed and the lights of New York give way to the darker landscapes of suburban New Jersey, Roger strikes up a conversation with Eve. She's friendly, but maintains a certain reserve, the kind of social politeness that well-bred people use when talking to strangers on trains. Their conversation flows easily over dinner, covering topics that travelers often discuss: where they're going, what they do for work, their impressions of the passing countryside. Eve mentions that she's traveling to Chicago on business, though she remains vague about the specifics of her work. As the evening progresses and the train travels through the Pennsylvania countryside, Roger begins to relax for the first time since his ordeal began. The gentle motion of the train, the comfortable surroundings, and Eve's pleasant company combine to create a sense that perhaps his troubles are behind him. This peaceful feeling is interrupted when Roger notices two men in suits walking through the dining car, apparently looking for someone. He recognizes them as the type of law enforcement officers who would be searching for a fugitive, and his stomach tightens as he realizes they're probably looking for him. Eve notices Roger's sudden change in demeanor and asks what's wrong. Roger finds himself in the difficult position of having to explain his situation to someone he's just met, knowing that his story will sound incredible and possibly concerning. He tells Eve an abbreviated version of his recent experiences, focusing on the mistaken identity at the Plaza Hotel and the confusing events that followed. He explains that he's innocent of any wrongdoing, but that circumstances have made him appear guilty to the authorities. Rather than being alarmed or trying to distance herself from Roger, Eve responds with surprising calmness. She suggests that if he's truly innocent, the best thing to do is avoid the police until he can find evidence to support his story. She offers to help him hide from the officers who are searching the train. Eve invites Roger to her private compartment, explaining that traveling alone has certain advantages when it comes to privacy. Roger accepts her offer gratefully, realizing that he has few other options as the train continues its journey through the night. Her compartment is elegantly appointed, with comfortable seating that converts to sleeping berths, and all the amenities that first-class train travel offers. The small space is efficiently designed to provide maximum comfort, with reading lights, temperature controls, and window curtains that can provide privacy from the passing countryside. As the train continues through the night across Pennsylvania and Ohio, Roger and Eve spend more time together in the privacy of her compartment. She orders room service from the dining car, and they share a late dinner while watching the dark landscape roll past outside their window. The meal arrives on elegant china with silver service, maintaining the high standards of the 20th Century Limited, even for in-compartment dining. They dine on well-prepared food, while the train rocks gently on its tracks, creating an intimate atmosphere that feels removed from the troubles that brought Roger aboard. Eve proves to be an engaging conversationalist, intelligent and well-traveled. She asks thoughtful questions about Roger's work in advertising and shares stories of her own travels and experiences. There's something mysterious about her that Roger finds intriguing, a sense that she's not revealing everything about herself. As the evening progresses, their conversation becomes more personal. Eve listens to Roger's concerns about his situation with genuine interest and offers practical advice about how he might prove his innocence. She suggests strategies for finding George Kaplan and understanding why Roger was mistaken for him. Roger finds himself attracted to Eve, not just because of her beauty, but because of her intelligence and the way she seems to understand his predicament without judgment. In the comfortable confines of the train compartment, with the rhythmic sound of wheels on track providing a soothing background, it becomes easy to forget about the troubles waiting for him in the outside world. But as they talk, Roger begins to notice small things that don't quite add up. Eve seems to know more about his situation than she should based on what he's told her. She asks questions that suggest she has information about his case that she hasn't mentioned obtaining. There are also practical concerns that begin to worry Roger. Eve's willingness to help a stranger who claims to be running from the police seems unusually trusting. Most people would be more cautious about involving themselves in such a situation. The next morning, as the train approaches Chicago, Roger decides to try calling George Kaplan's hotel room. Eve had mentioned earlier that she heard the police officers talking about Kaplan staying at the Ambassador East Hotel, and Roger realizes this might be his chance to finally make contact with the mysterious man whose identity has caused him so much trouble. The train makes a brief stop in Indiana, and Roger takes the opportunity to leave the train and find a telephone booth at the station. The morning air is fresh and cool, a pleasant change from the confined atmosphere of the train, and the small station has the quiet efficiency of rural America. He places a long-distance call to the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago, asking to be connected to George Kaplan's room. To his surprise, the call goes through, and the phone in Kaplan's room begins to ring. Roger's heart beats faster as he waits for someone to answer, hoping finally to speak with the person whose existence has turned his life upside down. The phone rings several times before someone picks up, But instead of Kaplan's voice, Roger hears what sounds like a hotel employee, perhaps housekeeping, who explains that Mr. Kaplan is not in his room at the moment. They offer to take a message, but Roger declines and hangs up, realizing that he's no closer to solving his mystery than he was before. However, the call has accomplished one important thing. It has confirmed that George Kaplan does exist, and that he is indeed staying at the Ambassador East Hotel in Chicago. This gives Roger a specific destination and a plan for what to do when the train arrives in the city. As Roger returns to the train, he feels a mixture of hope and apprehension. Hope, because he finally has a concrete lead to follow, and apprehension, because he still doesn't understand who George Kaplan is or why Roger was mistaken for him. Back on the train, Roger shares the news of his phone call with Eve, explaining that he now has confirmation that George Kaplan is in Chicago. Eve listens to his plan to visit the Ambassador East Hotel with apparent interest and support. However, what Roger doesn't realize is that while he was making his phone call at the station, Eve made a call of her own. She contacted Philip Van Damme, the man who had Roger kidnapped from the Plaza Hotel, and informed him of Roger's plans. Eve's phone call to Van Damme is conducted in the same calm, controlled manner that characterizes all her interactions. She reports Roger's location and his intention to visit the Ambassador East Hotel, providing Van Damme with the information he needs to intercept Roger in Chicago. The conversation between Eve and Van Damme is brief and businesslike, suggesting a relationship based on professional cooperation rather than personal involvement. Eve provides the information efficiently and then returns to her compartment before Roger comes back from his phone call. When Roger returns to the train, Eve greets him with the same warmth and concern she has shown throughout their journey together. She asks about his phone call and listens to his plans with apparent interest. There's nothing in her manner to suggest that she has just betrayed his location to the very people he's trying to avoid. This deception adds a layer of complexity to Roger's situation that he doesn't yet understand. He believes he has found an ally in Eve, someone who is willing to help him navigate his difficulties. In reality, she has been working against him from the beginning, though her motivations remain unclear. Roger gets off the train in Indiana. As the 20th Century Limited approaches its final destination of Chicago, Roger makes a decision that will significantly alter his journey. Rather than staying on the train until it reaches Union Station, he decides to get off at an earlier stop in rural Indiana. This decision comes from a growing sense that something isn't quite right about his situation. While he can't put his finger on exactly what's bothering him, Roger has developed the instinct that staying on the train until Chicago might be dangerous. The train makes a scheduled stop at a small station in the Indiana countryside, surrounded by farmland that stretches to the horizon in every direction. The station is modest, serving a rural community with a simple building and a short platform, where a few passengers wait to board. Roger says goodbye to Eve, thanking her for her help and kindness during the journey. She wishes him well with apparent sincerity, and they part company with the polite formality of travelers who have shared a pleasant journey together. As the train pulls away from the station, carrying Eve toward Chicago, Roger finds himself standing alone on the platform in rural Indiana. The landscape around him is peaceful and vast, with farmhouses scattered across rolling hills and the sound of wind moving through grain fields. The station agent gives Roger directions to the nearest town, explaining that he can catch a bus from there to Chicago if he chooses. The agent seems mildly curious about why someone would get off the famous 20th Century Limited at such a small stop, but he asks no questions and provides the information Roger needs. Roger begins walking along a rural road that leads away from the station towards the distant town. The morning sun is warming the countryside, and birds call from fence posts and telephone wires. For the first time since his adventure began, Roger finds himself in a completely peaceful setting, far from the complications of city life. The road Roger follows stretches straight across the Indiana farmland, with cornfields on both sides reaching toward distant horizons. The landscape is beautifully monotonous, with row after row of healthy crops, creating patterns that shift and change as Roger walks along the gravel shoulder. After walking for about an hour, Roger reaches a crossroads where another road intersects the one he's been following. There's a small bus stop here, nothing more than a simple bench and a weathered sign indicating that this is a scheduled stop for the local bus service that connects rural communities with larger towns. Roger sits down on the bench to wait for the next bus, checking his watch and trying to calculate how long it might take to get to Chicago by this route. The morning is peaceful, with only the sounds of nature providing background noise, insects buzzing in the grass, birds calling from nearby fence posts, and the distant sound of farm equipment working in fields far away. The solitude gives Roger time to think about his situation and try to make sense of everything that has happened to him. The events of the past few days seem surreal when considered against the backdrop of this quiet, rural setting. The kidnapping, the forced drinking, the incident at the United Nations, all of it feels like something that happened to someone else. As Roger sits on the bench, he notices a black car in the distance, traveling along the road towards the crossroads. The car moves at a steady pace, neither hurrying nor dawdling, but something about it catches Roger's attention. Perhaps it's the fact that this is the first vehicle he's seen since leaving the train station, or perhaps it's some instinctive wariness that has developed during his recent troubles. The car slows as it approaches the crossroads, and Roger can see that it's a large sedan, similar to the type of vehicle that brought him to Vandam's estate. For a moment, he wonders if this might be the same people who have been pursuing him, but then he reminds himself that he's in the middle of rural Indiana, far from where anyone would expect to find him. The black sedan comes to a stop near the bus stop, and Roger watches with growing unease as a man gets out of the passenger side. The man is well dressed in a business suit, which seems oddly formal for the rural setting. He's carrying a briefcase and appears to be waiting for something, though what that might be in this isolated location is unclear. The man doesn't acknowledge Roger's presence directly, but positions himself nearby, checking his watch and looking up and down the empty road as if expecting someone or something to arrive. His manner is professional, but somehow out of place in the peaceful farmland setting. Roger tries to engage the man in casual conversation, asking if he's also waiting for the bus. The man responds politely but briefly, explaining that he's waiting for someone to pick him up. His answers are cordial, but reveal nothing about who he is or what he's doing in this remote location. After a few minutes of standing near the bus stop, the man looks at his watch again and seems to make a decision. He walks back towards the sedan and speaks briefly with the driver, then gets back into the car. The sedan makes a U-turn and drives back in the direction it came from, leaving Roger alone again at the crossroads. The departure of the mysterious man and his car strikes Roger as odd, though he can't quite articulate why. Perhaps it's the formal dress in such a rural setting, or the fact that the man seemed to be waiting for something that never arrived. Whatever the reason, Roger feels a growing sense of unease about his isolated position on the empty road. He stands up from the bench and looks around at the vast farmland surrounding him. The landscape that seemed peaceful and comforting a few minutes ago now feels exposed and vulnerable. There's nowhere to hide, no buildings or trees nearby that could provide shelter if needed. Roger's growing unease proves justified when he hears the sound of an aircraft engine in the distance. Looking up, he sees a small yellow crop-dusting plane flying low over the farmland, following the pattern that such aircraft typically use when spraying pesticides or fertilizer on crops. At first, the plane seems to be going about normal agricultural business, flying back and forth over the cornfields in the systematic pattern that farmers use to ensure even coverage of their crops. Roger watches with idle interest, grateful for any distraction from his worried thoughts about his situation. But as the plane continues its flight pattern, Roger begins to notice that it seems to be paying particular attention to his area of the farmland. The aircraft makes several passes over the crossroads where he's standing, flying lower each time. On one pass, Roger can see the pilot clearly, and he realizes that the man appears to be looking down at him, specifically. The realization that he might be the target of the plane's attention fills Roger with alarm. He remembers the mysterious man in the business suit who left just before the plane appeared, and he begins to understand that his location may not be as secret as he had hoped. The crop duster makes another pass, this time flying directly toward Roger at a very low altitude. As it approaches, Roger can see that the plane is not spraying crops. Instead, it appears to be heading straight for him with what looks like hostile intent. Roger jumps off the bench and begins running along the road, trying to put distance between himself and the aircraft. The plane follows, swooping down toward him with its engine roaring. The peaceful morning air is suddenly filled with the loud noise of the aircraft and the sound of Roger's feet pounding on the gravel road. The plane makes several aggressive passes at Roger, forcing him to dive into the roadside ditch to avoid what appears to be deliberate attempts to hit him with the aircraft. Each pass brings the plane closer, and Roger realizes that whoever is flying it has serious intentions to harm him. Realizing that the open road offers no protection from the attacking aircraft, Roger scrambles over a fence and runs into the nearest cornfield. The tall corn plants provide some cover, though not enough to completely hide him from a plane flying overhead. The cornfield is dense and well maintained, with rows of healthy plants reaching well above Roger's head. The ground between the rows is soft earth, recently cultivated, which makes running difficult, but provides a natural path through the field. Roger tries to use the corn rows to mask his movement and make it harder for the pilot to track his location. The crop duster continues its attack, flying low over the cornfield and trying to locate Roger among the tall plants. The sound of the engine echoes across the farmland as the plane makes pass after pass, searching for its target. Roger can hear the aircraft approaching and tries to time his movements to avoid being in the open when it passes overhead. As he runs through the cornfield, Roger's business suit becomes torn and dirty from the corn leaves and the soft earth. His city shoes slip on the uneven ground, making it difficult to maintain his footing while trying to move quickly through the crop rows. Sweat runs down his face from the exertion and stress of the pursuit. The plane makes several attempts to attack Roger in the cornfield, flying so low that the landing gear nearly touches the tops of the corn plants. On one pass, the aircraft actually makes contact with some of the taller stalks, sending broken corn leaves flying through the air and demonstrating the pilot's determination to reach his target. Roger realizes that staying in the cornfield will not provide adequate protection indefinitely. The pilot knows approximately where he is and will eventually be able to coordinate an attack that catches him in the open between corn rows. He needs to find a different strategy for dealing with this aerial assault. After several terrifying minutes of running through the cornfield while being pursued by the crop duster, Roger hears a new sound, the rumble of a heavy truck engine approaching on the main road. Looking through the corn plants, he can see a large gasoline tanker truck traveling along the highway at moderate speed. Roger realizes that the truck might provide the salvation he desperately needs. If he can reach the road and flag down the driver, he might be able to get away from the attacking aircraft. The truck is large enough and solid enough to provide protection that the cornfield cannot offer. He runs through the last rows of corn towards the road, timing his approach to intercept the tanker truck. The crop duster, seeing Roger emerge from the cornfield, makes another diving attack, swooping down toward him as he reaches the edge of the road. Roger waves frantically at the truck driver, trying to get the man's attention, while simultaneously dodging the attacking aircraft. The situation must look incredibly bizarre to the truck driver. A well-dressed man in a torn business suit running out of a cornfield while being chased by a crop-dusting plane. The truck driver, seeing Roger's desperate situation and the aggressive behavior of the aircraft, begins to slow down. Roger runs alongside the truck, which is traveling too fast for him to climb aboard safely. The crop duster makes another pass, and Roger realizes that he needs to take drastic action. In a moment of desperation, Roger jumps directly in front of the tanker truck, forcing the driver to hit the brakes hard to avoid running him over. The truck comes to a screeching stop, and Roger climbs up into the cab, grateful for the solid steel protection it provides. The truck driver is understandably startled and confused by what has just happened. Roger tries to quickly explain that he's being attacked by the plane, though he realizes that his explanation sounds incredible. The driver looks up at the crop duster, which is now circling overhead, and seems to accept that something unusual and dangerous is taking place. As if to confirm Roger's story, the crop duster makes another aggressive pass at the stopped truck. The driver, now convinced that they are indeed under attack, puts the truck in gear and begins driving rapidly from the area, carrying Roger to safety from the aerial assault. After the truck driver drops him off at the nearest town, Roger finds himself in a small Indiana community, where the pace of life is slow and peaceful. The main street is lined with modest shops and businesses, and the local residents go about their daily routines without any sense of the drama that has just unfolded in their rural countryside. Roger locates a payphone outside the local diner and decides to call the only people who might be able to provide answers about his situation. He contacts the federal government offices in Washington, asking to speak with someone who can explain why he's being pursued by mysterious men and attacked by crop-dusting aircraft. The phone calls take some time to work through the bureaucracy, but eventually Roger is connected with someone who claims to have knowledge about his case. The government official listens to Roger's account of recent events with what sounds like genuine interest and concern. However, instead of providing the answers Roger hopes for, the official's responses only deepen the mystery. The man seems to know more about Roger's situation than Roger knows himself, asking specific questions about people and places that Roger has encountered. But when Roger asks for explanations, the official remains vague and evasive. The phone conversation leaves Roger more confused than ever about what's really happening to him. It's clear that his case involves government agencies and national security matters, but the specifics remain frustratingly unclear. The official suggests that Roger should come to Washington for a full briefing, but given Roger's recent experiences, he's reluctant to trust anyone completely. After hanging up the phone, Roger stands outside the small-town diner, trying to process what he's learned and decide on his next course of action. The attack by the crop duster has convinced him that his situation is far more serious than a simple case of mistaken identity. Someone is actively trying to harm him, and the reasons involve matters that reach the highest levels of government. Roger's phone call to Washington eventually leads to a meeting with a government official known only as the Professor. This meeting takes place in a sterile government office building, where the corridors are lined with unmarked doors and the atmosphere speaks of classified business conducted away from public scrutiny. The Professor is a middle-aged man with the bearing of someone who has spent decades working in intelligence services. He speaks with quiet authority and seems to know details about Roger's case that no one else has been willing to share. His manner is professional but not unkind, suggesting someone who understands the human cost of the work he does. In the privacy of his office, the Professor finally provides Roger with the answers he has been seeking. He explains that Roger became involved in this situation purely by accident, through a case of mistaken identity that has had far-reaching consequences. The Professor reveals that the US government has been conducting a counterintelligence operation against Philip Van Damme, the man who kidnapped Roger from the Plaza Hotel. Van Damme is involved in espionage activities that threaten American national security, and the government has been working to gather evidence against him and his associates. As part of this operation, the government created a fictional intelligence agent named George Kaplan. This imaginary person was given a hotel room, a travel schedule, and other details that would make him seem real to anyone investigating. The purpose was to make Van Damme believe that the government was using Kaplan to spy on his activities. The plan worked too well. Van Damme became convinced that George Kaplan was a real threat to his operations and began actively hunting for him. When Roger was mistaken for Kaplan at the Plaza Hotel, he inadvertently became the target of Van Damme's efforts to eliminate the fictional spy. The Professor explains the full scope of the deception that has engulfed Roger's life. George Kaplan, the man Roger has been trying to find, does not exist and never has existed. He is entirely a creation of government intelligence services designed to mislead Van Damme and his organization. The hotel rooms registered to Kaplan, the airline reservations, the phone calls, all of these were maintained by government operatives to create the illusion of a real person. When hotel staff answered the phone in Kaplan's room during Roger's call from the train, they were actually government agents maintaining the fiction. This revelation explains why Roger's search for Kaplan has been so frustrating. He has been looking for someone who exists only on paper and in the carefully maintained records of intelligence services. The real tragedy is that Roger became trapped in this fiction through pure chance, mistaken for a person who was never real in the first place. The Professor acknowledges that Roger's involvement was completely unintentional and that the government bears responsibility for the danger he has faced. However, he also explains that the situation has become complicated by developments that occurred after Roger was first mistaken for Kaplan. The intelligence operation against Van Damme is at a critical stage, and Roger's accidental involvement has actually provided unexpected opportunities for the government's counterintelligence efforts. While this is good news for national security, it means that Roger's troubles are far from over. The professor's briefing includes another shocking revelation that changes Roger's understanding of everything that has happened to him. Eve Kendall, the woman who helped him on the train and with whom he developed romantic feelings, is actually a government agent working undercover in Van Damme's organization. Eve has been placed within Van Damme's group as a double agent, pretending to work for him while actually gathering intelligence for the US government. Her assignment is one of the most dangerous types of undercover work, requiring her to maintain her false identity while surrounded by people who would kill her if they discovered her true loyalties. When Eve met Roger on the train, she was returning from a mission related to her undercover work with Van Damme. Her decision to help Roger was not purely altruistic. She was following orders to gather information about the man Van Damme believed to be George Kaplan. However, the professor suggests that Eve's feelings for Roger may have become genuine, even though their relationship began as part of her professional assignment. The complexity of her situation means that she must balance her personal feelings with her duty to complete the intelligence mission that has placed her life at risk. This revelation forces Roger to reconsider every interaction he had with Eve during their time together on the train. Her knowledge of his situation, her willingness to help him, her sophisticated manner, all of these details take on new meaning when understood in the context of her undercover assignment. The professor explains that Eve's position within Van Damme's organization is extremely precarious. If Van Damme discovers that she is working for the government, she will almost certainly be killed. The success of the intelligence operation depends on maintaining her cover until the mission is complete. Learning about Eve's true identity and the danger she faces transforms Roger's understanding of his situation. What began as a quest to clear his own name has become something much more significant, a chance to help protect someone he cares about and to serve his country's interests at the same time. Roger tells the professor that he wants to help with the mission to protect Eve and gather evidence against Van Damme. Despite the dangers he has already faced, Roger feels a responsibility to assist in any way he can, both because of his feelings for Eve and because his accidental involvement started the current crisis. The professor explains that Roger's offer to help is actually crucial to the success of the operation. Because Van Damme believes Roger is George Kaplan, his continued involvement can help maintain the deception that has been central to the intelligence-gathering effort. The plan that emerges from their discussion is complex, but elegant. Roger will continue to play the role of George Kaplan, appearing at predetermined locations where Van Damme's people will see him. This will help convince Van Damme that Kaplan is real and continue to draw attention away from Eve's true activities. At the same time, Roger's apparent death will need to be staged to protect Eve from suspicion. If Van Damme believes that Eve has successfully helped eliminate George Kaplan, it will strengthen her position within his organization and allow her to continue gathering intelligence. The professor emphasizes the risks involved in this plan. Roger will be placing himself in danger by continuing to act as Kaplan, and there's always the possibility that something could go wrong with the staging of his apparent death. However, the intelligence being gathered by Eve is too valuable to risk, and Roger's cooperation is essential to protecting her. The plan to stage Roger's death takes place at a public location where Van Damme's people can witness the event and report back to their leader. The chosen location is Mount Rushmore, where tourists and visitors provide natural cover for the operation, while the dramatic setting adds credibility to the deception. Roger and Eve meet in a public area of the Mount Rushmore Visitor Center, surrounded by families on vacation and tourists taking photographs of the famous carved faces. The normalcy of the setting contrasts sharply with the dangerous game they are playing. Their conversation is carefully orchestrated to be overheard by Van Damme's operatives, who are positioned nearby, posing as tourists. Roger and Eve discuss the intelligence information that Kaplan supposedly has been gathering, speaking loudly enough for their hidden audience to hear the details. As planned, their conversation escalates into what appears to be a confrontation. Eve accuses Roger of betraying her to the authorities, while Roger responds with angry denials. To the watching operatives, it looks like a genuine conflict between two people involved in espionage activities. The confrontation reaches its climax when Eve produces a gun and appears to unalive Roger in full view of the tourists and Van Damme's men. Roger falls dramatically, and the crowd reacts with shock and confusion as what appears to be a murder has taken place in front of them. The shooting looks completely authentic to everyone watching, including the innocent tourists who witness it. Eve plays her part perfectly, showing the right amount of emotion and shock at what she has apparently done. The confusion and panic that follow provide cover for the next phase of the operation. The staged shooting is so convincing that even Roger is surprised by how realistic it appears. The blank cartridges and the small bag of fake blood hidden in his clothing combine to create the illusion of a genuine fatal shooting. As he lies motionless on the ground, Roger can hear the shocked reactions of tourists and the satisfied murmurs of Van Damme's operatives. Emergency personnel, who are actually government agents posing as paramedics, arrive quickly on the scene and begin treating Roger's apparent wounds. They load him onto a stretcher and carry him to an ambulance, maintaining the deception even as they transport him away from Mount Rushmore. Once safely away from public view, Roger is taken to a secure government facility, where he can recover from the ordeal and receive briefing about the next phase of the operation. The professor congratulates him on his performance and confirms that Van Damme's people witnessed the shooting and believe that George Kaplan is dead. However, the operation is not yet complete. Eve's position within Van Damme's organization is still precarious, and the intelligence mission requires continued, careful management to ensure her safety and the success of the broader counterintelligence effort. Roger learns that his apparent death has indeed strengthened Eve's standing with Van Damme, who now believes that she has successfully eliminated the threat posed by George Kaplan. This gives her greater access to Van Damme's operations and improves her ability to gather the intelligence information that the government needs. But the professor also reveals a troubling development. Van Damme has become suspicious of Eve for reasons unrelated to the Kaplan operation, and there are signs that he may be planning to eliminate her before the intelligence mission can be completed. Despite the apparent success of the staged shooting, Roger becomes increasingly concerned about Eve's safety and the government's commitment to protecting her. He confronts the professor about the risks that Eve is facing and demands more specific information about plans to ensure her safety. The professor acknowledges Roger's concerns, but explains that intelligence operations always involve calculated risks. Eve understood these dangers when she accepted her undercover assignment, and she has continued to fulfill her mission despite the growing threats to her safety. However, Roger argues that the situation has changed since his involvement began. The fact that Van Damme has become suspicious of Eve for other reasons means that the original risk calculations may no longer be valid. Roger demands that the government take immediate action to extract Eve from her dangerous position. The professor explains that extracting Eve prematurely would compromise years of intelligence work and potentially expose other government operatives working in related areas. The information that Eve is gathering about Van Damme's network could prevent significant threats to national security, making her continued mission essential to protecting American interests. This conversation reveals the fundamental tension between Roger's personal concern for Eve's safety and the government's broader strategic objectives. While Roger cares primarily about protecting someone he has come to love, the professor must balance individual safety against national security requirements. The disagreement between Roger and the professor highlights the human cost of intelligence work and the difficult decisions that must be made when personal relationships intersect with matters of national security. Roger's emotional investment in Eve's well-being conflicts with the cold calculations that drive government intelligence operations. The professor's concerns about Eve's safety prove justified when intelligence reports indicate that Van Damme is planning to leave the country and take Eve with him. Once they are outside the United States, it will become much more difficult for the government to protect Eve or extract her from Van Damme's organization. The intelligence suggests that Van Damme has become suspicious of Eve's loyalty and may be planning to eliminate her once they reach their foreign destination. This means that time is running out for any rescue operation, and immediate action is required to prevent Eve from being taken beyond the reach of American authorities. Roger volunteers to participate in the mission to rescue Eve, arguing that his involvement as the fake George Kaplan could provide valuable cover for the operation. The professor is initially reluctant to risk Roger's safety further, but eventually agrees that his participation could be crucial to the mission's success. The plan that emerges involves intercepting Van Damme at his departure point before he can leave the country with Eve. Intelligence reports indicate that Van Damme has a private aircraft waiting at a remote location, and the rescue operation will need to prevent their departure while ensuring Eve's safety. Roger's role in the mission will be to create a distraction that draws Van Damme's attention and provides cover for the government agents who will actually carry out the rescue. His appearance as the supposedly dead George Kaplan should shock Van Damme and his associates, giving the rescue team the advantage they need. Van Damme has chosen a modernist house perched dramatically on the edge of a cliff near Mount Rushmore as his final base of operations before leaving the country. The house is a masterpiece of contemporary architecture, with clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that provide spectacular views of the surrounding landscape. The setting sun casts long shadows across the Black Hills as Roger approaches the house, using the rocky terrain to provide cover for his approach. The landscape around Mount Rushmore is rugged and beautiful, with pine trees and granite outcroppings creating a dramatic backdrop for the final confrontation. Roger moves carefully through the trees and boulders, trying to get close enough to the house to observe what's happening inside without being detected by Van Damme's security personnel. The modern architecture of the building makes concealment difficult, as the large windows reveal much of the interior to anyone watching from outside. Through the windows, Roger can see Eve inside the house, apparently preparing for the departure that will take her away from American protection. She moves through the elegant interior with the poise she has always displayed, but Roger can sense a tension in her manner that suggests she understands the danger of her situation. Van Damme is also visible through the windows, directing his associates as they prepare for their departure. His manner is calm and controlled as always, but there's something in his movements that suggests he is making final preparations for something significant. Roger realizes that he needs to get closer to the house to understand exactly what Van Damme is planning, and to find an opportunity to help Eve escape from her dangerous situation. The rescue mission depends on his ability to create the right kind of distraction at the right moment. As Roger watches from his concealment outside Van Damme's house, he observes a conversation taking place between Eve and Van Damme in the main room. Although he cannot hear their words, their body language suggests that they are discussing something serious and potentially threatening. What Roger doesn't realize is that Van Damme has discovered the truth about the staged shooting at Mount Rushmore. His intelligence network has uncovered evidence that George Kaplan's death was faked, and he now understands that Eve has been working against him all along. This discovery puts Eve in immediate mortal danger. Van Damme's organization does not tolerate betrayal, and his previous polite demeanor toward Eve is now replaced by cold calculation about how to deal with someone who has been spying on his operations. Eve learns from this conversation that not only has her cover been blown, but that Roger is still alive and may be attempting some kind of rescue operation. This knowledge is both reassuring, because it means Roger survived the apparent shooting, and terrifying, because it means he may be walking into a trap. Van Damme explains to Eve that he has known about her government connections for some time, and has been feeding her false information while using her to learn about American intelligence operations. Her mission, which she believed was successful, has actually been compromised from the beginning. The revelation that her undercover work has been discovered means that Eve's life is now in immediate danger. Van Damme makes it clear that he cannot allow her to return to American authorities with knowledge of his operations, regardless of what false information he may have provided to her. Leonard, Van Damme's quiet and observant assistant, has been watching Eve carefully throughout their association. His suspicions about her true loyalties have been growing, and he finally presents his concerns to Van Damme in a private conversation that Roger cannot observe from his position outside the house. Leonard's suspicions are based on small details that he has noticed over time. Conversations that Eve has cut short when he approached, phone calls that she has made at unusual times, and her reactions to certain topics that seemed inconsistent with someone truly loyal to Van Damme's cause. More significantly, Leonard has discovered evidence linking Eve to the staged shooting at Mount Rushmore. His investigation has revealed that the paramedics who treated the supposedly dead George Kaplan were not actually medical personnel, but government agents involved in an elaborate deception. Leonard presents this evidence to Van Damme, confirming what Van Damme has already begun to suspect about Eve's true allegiances. The conversation between the two men is conducted in the calm, businesslike manner that characterizes all of Van Damme's operations, but the implications are deadly serious. Van Damme receives Leonard's report without surprise, suggesting that he has been testing Eve's loyalty and waiting for confirmation of his suspicions. His response is measured and controlled, but Roger can see through the windows that the atmosphere in the house has changed dramatically. The discovery of Eve's betrayal means that Van Damme's departure plans must be accelerated and modified. He can no longer afford to keep Eve alive once they leave American territory, as she poses too great a threat to the security of his organization. Through careful observation and the fragments of conversation he can overhear, Roger begins to understand the full extent of the danger that Eve faces. Van Damme is planning to take her aboard his private aircraft, but not as a companion for his escape, as a victim who will not survive the journey. The plan, as Roger pieces it together, involves eliminating Eve once the aircraft is over international waters, where her death cannot be investigated by American authorities. Van Damme's organization has used this method before to dispose of people who have become security threats. This discovery fills Roger with urgent determination to prevent Eve's departure with Van Damme. The rescue mission is no longer just about extracting a government agent from a dangerous situation. It has become a race to save someone's life before it's too late to act. Roger realizes that he must abandon his plans to wait for the government rescue team and take immediate action himself. The timing of Van Damme's departure means that any delay could result in Eve being taken beyond the reach of any rescue attempt. From his position outside the house, Roger can see preparations being made for departure. Luggage is being loaded into vehicles, and there are signs that the group will be leaving for the aircraft very soon. The window of opportunity for any rescue attempt is closing rapidly. Roger makes the decision to reveal himself and create the distraction that the mission requires, even though this means abandoning the careful plans that were made for the rescue operation. The circumstances have changed, and immediate action is more important than following the original strategy. Roger approaches Van Damme's house directly, abandoning any attempt at concealment in favor of speed and surprise. His sudden appearance at the front door shocks Van Damme and his associates, who believed that George Kaplan was dead and that their security had been maintained. The confrontation that follows is brief, but intense. Roger's appearance confirms Van Damme's suspicions about the staged shooting and makes it clear that his organization has been deceived by government intelligence services. Van Damme's calm demeanor cracks slightly as he realizes the full extent to which his operations have been compromised. Eve takes advantage of the confusion caused by Roger's arrival to break away from Van Damme's control. The shock of seeing Roger alive gives her the opportunity she needs to move towards the exit, though Van Damme's men quickly move to prevent her escape. What follows is a chaotic scene as Roger and Eve attempt to flee from Van Damme's house while being pursued by his armed associates. The modern architecture of the building, with its open floor plan and large windows, provides little cover for their escape attempt. They manage to reach the exterior of the house, but their escape route is limited by the dramatic location on the cliff edge. The house sits on a narrow ledge with steep drops on multiple sides, channeling any escape attempt toward the Mount Rushmore monument itself. Roger and Eve find themselves running towards the famous carved faces, with Van Damme's men in pursuit behind them. The tourist areas around Mount Rushmore are closed for the evening, leaving the monument deserted, except for the participants in this dangerous chase. The escape route leads Roger and Eve onto the face of Mount Rushmore itself, where they must climb across the carved features of the presidential monuments while being pursued by armed men. The granite surface is steep and treacherous, with limited handholds and the constant danger of falling from the great height. The setting sun creates dramatic shadows across the carved faces, making it difficult to see secure footing and safe paths across the monument. Roger and Eve move carefully but quickly, knowing that their pursuers are close behind and that any mistake could result in a fatal fall. The climb across Mount Rushmore is both physically demanding and psychologically challenging. The scale of the carved faces is enormous, and the exposure to height and weather creates constant stress for the climbers. Each movement must be calculated to maintain both speed and safety. Roger, despite his city background and business attire, proves surprisingly capable at the physical demands of climbing across the monument. His determination to protect Eve gives him strength and focus that overcomes his lack of mountaineering experience. Eve, hampered by her dress and shoes, still manages to keep pace with Roger as they traverse the dangerous granite surface. Her intelligence training has apparently included physical fitness preparation that serves her well in this unexpected situation. Behind them, Van Damme's men follow onto the monument, but they are also challenged by the difficult climbing conditions. The pursuit becomes a deadly game of mountaineering skill as much as a chase between adversaries. Leonard, who has proven to be the most dangerous and persistent of Van Damme's associates, leads the pursuit onto Mount Rushmore. His quiet, methodical personality makes him particularly threatening in this situation, as he approaches the chase with the same careful attention to detail that he brings to all his work. Leonard is armed and willing to use his weapon, even in the challenging conditions of climbing across the monument. He positions himself to cut off Roger and Eve's escape route, forcing them toward more dangerous areas of the carved faces, where their options for movement become increasingly limited. The confrontation with Leonard takes place on a narrow ledge near one of the presidential faces, where the granite surface provides minimal security for anyone attempting to maintain their footing. The combination of height, exposure, and the presence of an armed adversary creates maximum danger for Roger and Eve. Leonard's attempt to eliminate Roger and Eve is interrupted by the arrival of government agents who have been following the situation from a distance. However, the agents' ability to help is limited by the dangerous location and the need to avoid causing Roger and Eve to fall from the monument. The standoff on Mount Rushmore becomes a complex tactical situation involving multiple parties with different objectives, all operating in extremely dangerous conditions. Leonard's determination to complete his mission conflicts with the government agents' efforts to rescue Roger and Eve. The resolution of this confrontation will depend on quick thinking and careful action by all involved parties, as any mistake in the treacherous conditions could result in tragedy for the innocent people caught in the middle of the intelligence operation. Just as the situation on Mount Rushmore reaches its most dangerous point, FBI agents who have been coordinating with the professor's intelligence operation arrive on the scene. Their intervention comes at the crucial moment when Leonard is preparing to eliminate Roger and Eve on the monument's face. The FBI agents are specially trained for tactical operations in challenging environments, and they approach the Mount Rushmore situation with professional competence and appropriate equipment. Their arrival changes the balance of power in the confrontation and provides the support that Roger and Eve desperately need. The agents coordinate their intervention carefully to avoid endangering the civilians they are trying to rescue. Working in the dangerous conditions on the monument requires specialized techniques and equipment that the agents have brought with them. They understand that one wrong move could send Roger and Eve tumbling down the granite face. From their position above on the monument, the agents can see Leonard positioning himself to corner Roger and Eve. The federal officers move quietly across the rocky surface, using ropes and climbing gear to maintain their footing on the steep presidential faces. The evening light creates long shadows that help conceal their approach from Leonard and the other hostile agents. The professor coordinates with the FBI team from a safe distance, directing their movements through radio communication. He watches through binoculars as his agents work to outflank Leonard, without alerting him to their presence. Every decision must be made carefully, as the lives of innocent people hang in the balance on the treacherous granite surface. When the FBI agents finally reveal themselves, they do so with professional precision. They call out to Leonard, identifying themselves as federal officers and ordering him to surrender his weapon. The sound of their voices echoes across the carved faces of the presidents, creating an surreal moment where law enforcement confronts international espionage on America's most iconic monument. Leonard realizes that his mission has been compromised, but his dedication to Van Damme's organization prevents him from surrendering easily. He continues to threaten Roger and Eve while trying to negotiate his own escape from the monument. The Federal agents maintained their positions, keeping their weapons trained on Leonard while working to protect the civilians. The standoff on Mount Rushmore continues for several tense minutes as the FBI agents work to resolve the situation without anyone falling from the monument. Roger and Eve remain pressed against the granite surface, afraid to move while Leonard still poses a threat with his weapon drawn. The breakthrough comes when additional FBI agents arrive at the scene from different angles. With Leonard now surrounded and his escape routes blocked, he finally realizes that his position is hopeless. The Federal officers talk him into lowering his weapon and surrendering peacefully, though every moment of negotiation feels dangerous given the precarious location. Once Leonard surrenders, the FBI agents carefully approach Roger and Eve to begin their rescue. The agents use climbing equipment to secure safety lines around both civilians before attempting to move them to safer ground. Roger, exhausted from the chase and climb, gratefully accepts the help of the experienced agents. Eve, despite her intelligence training, is also relieved to have professional assistance in getting down from the monument safely. The agents guide her carefully across the granite surface, pointing out secure handholds and safe paths that she and Roger had been unable to see in their desperate flight from their pursuers. The rescue operation takes place slowly and methodically, with each movement planned to avoid any risk of falls or injuries. The FBI agents demonstrate remarkable skill in working within the challenging environment of Mount Rushmore, treating the carved presidential faces with respect while ensuring the safety of everyone involved. As Roger and Eve are helped down from the monument, they can see other FBI agents taking Leonard and the remaining hostile agents into custody. The entire espionage operation that began with a simple case of mistaken identity in a New York hotel is finally coming to its conclusion on the face of America's most famous monument. The professor arrives at the rescue site as Roger and Eve reach safety at the base of Mount Rushmore. He expresses his gratitude to both of them for their courage and their willingness to help protect Eve's cover as a government agent. The intelligence operation has been successful, though at a great personal cost to both Roger and Eve. Roger, still catching his breath from the harrowing experience, looks back up at the carved faces of Mount Rushmore with a new appreciation for the monument's imposing height and the danger they have just survived. Eve stands beside him, finally able to reveal her true identity and her work for the American government. After the dramatic events at Mount Rushmore, Roger and Eve find themselves in a much quieter and more peaceful setting. The government debriefing sessions are complete, and the espionage case has been closed with the arrest of Van Damme and his associates. Roger's name has been cleared of all charges, and his identity as an innocent victim of mistaken identity has been firmly established. The scene shifts to a more intimate and romantic setting as Roger and Eve board a train together. This time their train journey is voluntary and pleasant, very different from Roger's desperate flight from New York, or Eve's conflicted assistance during their first meeting on the rails. They settle into comfortable seats as the train begins its journey through the American countryside. The atmosphere between Roger and Eve is warm and relaxed now that all the secrets have been revealed and the danger has passed. They talk quietly together as the train moves smoothly along its tracks, the rhythmic sound of the wheels creating a peaceful background to their conversation. The stress and fear of their recent experiences have been replaced by a gentle closeness. Roger looks at Eve with new understanding and appreciation. He now knows about her work as a government agent and her courage in maintaining her dangerous cover for so long. The woman he fell in love with during their first train journey has proven to be even more remarkable than he initially realized, though her job required her to deceive him temporarily. Eve, no longer burdened by the need to maintain her cover story, can finally be completely honest with Roger. She explains how difficult it was to pretend to betray him while actually working to protect him and preserve her mission. The relief of being able to speak freely is evident in her relaxed demeanor and genuine smiles. As the train continues its journey, the conversation between Roger and Eve turns to their future together. The experiences they have shared, from the romantic dinner on their first train ride to the life-threatening climb on Mount Rushmore, have created a bond between them that goes beyond ordinary romance. They have literally trusted each other with their lives. The movie concludes with a subtle but clear indication that Roger and Eve are planning to marry and build a life together. Their relationship, which began under the most unusual and dangerous circumstances, has proven strong enough to survive deception, betrayal, and mortal danger. The train carries them away from their past adventures and toward a peaceful future together. As the train disappears into the distance, we're left with the understanding that Roger Thornhill's case of mistaken identity, which began as a nightmare of confusion and danger, has ultimately led him to find true love and a new purpose in life. The ordinary businessman who was accidentally caught up in an international espionage plot has emerged as a hero who was willing to risk everything for the woman he loves. The end. If you are still awake, try our other movie story videos. Subscribe if you liked the video. Thanks.